Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Starting Line. I'm your host, Sarah Allen. There are a number of requirements in order to get a permit to carry a firearm in Minnesota. You have to go through firearms training, complete an application form, and not be listed in criminal gang activity, just to name a few. Some see these requirements as a means to safeguard the public from guns getting into the wrong hands, while others say the requirements infringe on their Second Amendment rights. Representative Steve Dresskowski sponsors a bill that would provide for the right to carry a firearm without a permit. His bill, House File 3318, says notwithstanding any other law to the contrary, every Minnesota resident has the constitutional right to keep and bear firearms. The bill would give law-abiding Minnesotans the right to carry openly or concealed, carry loaded or unloaded, transport, possess, use, acquire, purchase, transfer, inherit, buy, sell, give, or otherwise dispose of or receive any firearm or self-defense device without a permit, permission, or restriction of any kind from or by this state or any of its political subdivisions. House File 3318 is our starting line bill for the week. Thank you, Representative Dresskowski, for joining us. Can you tell us why you are sponsoring this bill?
I think a lot of us would maintain, and I think there's millions of Minnesotans that would maintain that that many of the laws that have been put in place to restrict the use of firearms are actually unconstitutional. Now, there are some states that have something called constitutional carry, and I think there's 5. I looked this morning. They are Arizona, Wyoming, Montana, Alaska, and Vermont, which notably has had constitutional carry since 1791. And what constitutional carry does is it even more fully recognizes and respects the Second Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which again says the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. And then there's a period at the end. And so these other states, and I think there's about a dozen or so other states that are entertaining bills similar to this, that would move those states closer to a constitutional carry in which people are not required to have a permit simply to carry a firearm, which is guaranteed them by the U.S. Constitution. So there are other states doing this type of thing.
Some people may argue that getting a permit is not difficult and the extra step is worth it. What would you say to them?
I would say that the supreme law of the land, the U.S. Constitution, doesn't say anything about being required to check in with the government in order to fully exercise your constitutionally guaranteed rights. It says again, the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. And there's a period at the end and nothing after it. Very clear, but there has been over time, obviously, these incremental laws put in place, both federally and in states that have infringed upon the Constitution, the supreme law of the land, and have done that out of the interests of people that express exactly what you did, what you said. Well, you know, it's not that difficult to do. Why don't you do that? And I'm trying to remember who said it. I think it was the quote, Benjamin Franklin, I think, said, I believe it was him, those willing to sacrifice liberty for security deserve neither. And I think that's very salient here.
Will you try next session, if you can, to get more traction on your bill?
You know, I think that'll depend on what happens, you know, in terms of the elections. There's a big election in front of us. We will either come back in the majority, the Republicans will, or again in the minority, and I think that'll really dictate a lot of that. One thing that you look at when you're in the majority, you are in the position of governing, and I think some judgments have to be made at that point, and certainly this is an area, as any area of law, where those judgments would have to be made. Is that something that is is this bill something that has a reasonable chance of passing in any legislature? I would sense, at least in the Minnesota climate and culture, political climate at this point, probably not yet. And I don't think we're there. So I would probably not offer it next time, but it would offer instead maybe some smaller increments that bring us back towards that freedom that is guaranteed by the Second Amendment, some things that could actually pass, and then we would be able to demonstrate really our sincere efforts towards that as a majority as we work to govern and restore some of those lost Second Amendment liberties.
Let's see where House File 3318 has been and is going in the legislative process. It had its introduction and first reading. It was referred to the House Public Safety, Finance, and Policy Committee. And as Representative Dresskowski said, we're going to have to wait and see what happens to this bill. You can learn more about these bills and others in our online news service, Session Daily. This nonpartisan news source employs a staff of professional writers, editors, and photographers that provide you with in-depth, nonpartisan coverage of the Minnesota House of Representatives. Make sure to subscribe to Session Daily to receive updates right to your email inbox. You can also watch live coverage of committee and floor action on House TV. Coming up next week, we'll have a recap on all the bills we have covered here on Starting Line during the biennium. Plus, we'll look to see if there's been any movement on Representative Dresskowski's bill. As always, thousands of bills get introduced every legislative session in Minnesota. All of them first have to cross the starting line.